The moment my daughter-in-law told me that old people should stay quiet, something inside me broke. It happened during Sunday dinner in my own home. I had simply offered an opinion about my granddaughter's future when Vanessa set down her wine glass and smiled. Charlotte, with all due respect, old people should stay quiet and let younger people make the decisions, sir. The room fell silent. My son, Ethan, stared at his plate. No one defended me. That night, after everyone left, I sat alone in the kitchen fighting back tears. Then I opened a drawer and found a yellowed envelope my late husband William had left behind years ago. Across the front, in his handwriting, were 7 words that changed everything. Open this if they make you feel small. Ise. If you've ever felt dismissed, ignored, or disrespected by someone you loved, I'd love to hear your story in the comments. Where are you watching from today, and what time is it there right now? Your messages mean more than you know. And if stories about family, resilience, and finding your voice speak to you, don't forget to like and subscribe so we can continue this journey together. 4 years had passed since I lost my husband, William Higgins. Some mornings, I still woke up expecting to hear the familiar sound of him humming in the kitchen while making coffee. For 42 years, that sound had been part of my life. Then one winter morning, it was gone forever. People often say, time heals everything. I don't believe that's true. Time teaches you how to carry pain without letting it crush you. That's different. After William passed away, the house became painfully quiet. It sat on a peaceful street outside Columbus, Ohio, the same house where we had raised our son Ethan, celebrated birthdays, hosted Christmas dinners, and built a life together from almost nothing. Every room held a memory. The mark on the hallway wall where Ethan measured his height every year. The dining room where William proposed to me for the 2nd time on our 25th anniversary. The backyard where our grandchildren chased fireflies during summer evenings. I couldn't imagine leaving that house. It wasn't just a building. It was my history. At first, Ethan visited often after his father's funeral. He would stop by after work carrying groceries. Sometimes he would fix things around the house. Sometimes we'd simply sit on the porch and talk. Those moments reminded me of the sweet little boy who used to hold my hand on the first day of school because he was afraid of getting lost. I thought we would always have that bond. But then, little things began to change. At first, I blamed myself. Maybe I was becoming too sensitive. Maybe grief was making me imagine problems that weren't really there. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. The change didn't happen overnight. It happened gradually, slowly, quietly. And it began after Ethan married Vanessa. Now, don't misunderstand me. I truly wanted to love my daughter-in-law. When Ethan introduced her to us 6 years earlier, I welcomed her with open arms. She was intelligent, confident, and ambitious. She worked in corporate marketing and always seemed to know exactly what she wanted. William admired her determination. I admired how much Ethan seemed to love her. I believed she would become part of our family. For a while, everything seemed fine. Then William died, and somehow, after that, Vanessa started treating me differently. At first, it was small comments that sounded helpful on the surface. "Charlotte, are you sure you should be driving by yourself?" "Charlotte, maybe you shouldn't worry about financial matters anymore." "Charlotte, this house is a lot for someone your age," always said with a smile, always sounding concerned. But underneath those words was something else, something that made me feel smaller each time she spoke. One afternoon, she came over while I was planting flowers near the front porch. She watched me for a moment before shaking her head. "You still do all this yourself?" I smiled. "I enjoy gardening." She laughed softly. "Well, don't overdo it. At your age, one fall could change everything." The words stung more than I expected, not because she mentioned my age, because she spoke as if my life was already ending, as if I was fragile, as if I was waiting for permission to exist. I noticed Ethan rarely corrected her. That hurt even more. He would simply nod, or change the subject, or pretend he hadn't heard. The son who once defended me against playground bullies now sat silently while his wife chipped away at my dignity. One evening, I called my best friend, Grace Miller. Grace and I had been friends for nearly 50 years. She knew me better than almost anyone. After listening to me vent for 20 minutes, she sighed. "Charlotte, I don't think you're imagining this." I stared out the kitchen window. "You think she's trying to push me out?" "I think she's testing boundaries." "Why?" Grace was quiet for a moment. "Because people show you who they are when they think you're vulnerable." I didn't want to believe that. I wanted to believe Vanessa simply lacked tact. I wanted to believe Ethan would eventually notice. I wanted to believe my family was still my family. But the uneasy feeling continued growing. A few weeks later, Ethan and Vanessa invited themselves over for dinner. Everything seemed normal until Vanessa casually asked a question. "So, Charlotte, have you updated your estate planning recently?" I nearly dropped my fork. "My what?" "Your estate planning," she smiled. "You know, wills, assets, things like that." I laughed awkwardly. "Why would you ask that?" She shrugged. "Just thinking ahead." Thinking ahead. The phrase stayed with me long after they left. Over the following months, similar questions appeared. Did I know where all my paperwork was? Had I considered downsizing? Had I looked into retirement communities? Had I thought about giving Ethan access to certain accounts in case of emergencies? Always framed as concern, always presented as help. Yet every conversation somehow returned to my finances, my property, or my future. Never my happiness, never my dreams, never what I wanted, only what might happen when I was no longer capable of deciding for myself. One afternoon, while organizing old photographs, I found a picture of William sitting on the back porch. He was smiling directly at the camera, strong, confident, protective. For some reason, tears filled my eyes. I missed him terribly. But more than that, I missed the safety I felt when he was around. William had always been able to read people, far better than I could. If someone had bad intentions, he sensed it immediately. As I stared at that photograph, a memory suddenly surfaced. A conversation we'd had just a few months before he passed away. We were sitting in the living room. The television was on, but neither of us was watching it. William had looked unusually serious. "Promise me something." "What?" "If you ever feel pressured after I'm gone, don't rush into decisions." I laughed. "What decisions?" "Any decisions." His eyes had remained fixed on mine, especially decisions involving money, property, or family. At the time, I thought it was simply another husband worrying about his wife. Now, years later, the memory felt different, almost like a warning. That night, I walked upstairs and opened the closet where I kept some of William's belongings. Most days, I couldn't bring myself to look inside. The grief was still too close. But that night felt different. I found an old storage box tucked behind several winter coats. Inside were photographs, documents, letters, and personal keepsakes. I carefully lifted each item. Then I noticed something unusual, a sealed envelope with my name written across the front in William's handwriting. My hands froze. For a long moment, I simply stared at it. I had never seen that envelope before. The paper had yellowed with age. My heart began beating faster. Something told me this wasn't an accident. Something told me William had left it there intentionally, waiting for the right moment, for the moment when I would finally need it. And as I sat there holding that envelope in the silence of our bedroom, I couldn't shake the feeling that my husband had seen something coming long before I ever did. The first time I realized Vanessa wasn't simply being controlling, but was actively trying to take over my life, was on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. I had just returned from a doctor's appointment when I found her sitting at my kitchen table, alone. A stack of papers sat in front of her. For a moment, I thought she might be helping organize something. Then I noticed what those papers were. My utility bills, my insurance statements, my bank correspondence. My stomach tightened. Vanessa looked up and smiled as though nothing was unusual. "Oh, good, you're back." I set my purse down slowly. "What are you doing?" "I was helping." "Helping with what?" She gestured toward the papers. Getting organized. I stared at her. I didn't ask anyone to do that. Her smile faded slightly. You don't have to ask, Charlotte. Family helps family. The words sounded harmless, but something about the way she said them made me uncomfortable, as if she believed she had a right to access parts of my life that belonged only to me. I gathered the papers and placed them back into their envelopes. I appreciate the thought, but I can manage my own paperwork. For a brief second, irritation flashed across her face. Then it disappeared. Oh, of course. But I knew that look. She wasn't happy. And that wouldn't be the last time. Over the next several months, Vanessa inserted herself into nearly every aspect of my life. If I scheduled a doctor's appointment, she wanted details. If I bought something new, she questioned the expense. If I mentioned traveling somewhere, she wanted to know how much it cost. At first, I tried to give her the benefit of the doubt. Maybe she genuinely cared. Maybe she was trying to look after me. But caring and controlling are not the same thing. And eventually, the difference became impossible to ignore. One Sunday afternoon, Ethan and Vanessa stopped by with Lily and Mason. The children immediately ran outside. Ethan settled into his usual chair. Vanessa walked around my living room studying everything, the furniture, the photographs, the decorations. Finally, she sighed. This house is just too much for one person. I looked up from my book. Too much? It's huge. It's a 3-bedroom house, she laughed. Exactly. I closed my book. I've lived here for 46 years. Vanessa folded her arms. That's not really the point. I already knew where the conversation was heading. It wasn't the first time. She leaned forward. Have you ever thought about selling it? There it was, again. The house. Always the house. I smiled politely. No. You could make a lot of money. I'm not interested. You could move somewhere smaller. I'm happy here. Vanessa glanced toward Ethan, as though expecting backup, and unfortunately, she got it. Ethan cleared his throat. Mom, she's just trying to help. The words hit harder than they should have, not because they were cruel, because they sounded rehearsed, like a line he'd repeated before. I looked at my son, the little boy I had raised, the young man I had supported through college, the person I had stayed awake worrying about for decades, and suddenly he seemed very far away. I'm capable of deciding where I live, Zagardai, I said quietly. Neither of them responded. That silence told me everything. A few weeks later, Grace came over for coffee. I told her about the conversation. She listened carefully. Then she asked a question I hadn't considered. How often does Vanessa bring up your house? I thought about it. Quite a bit. How often does she ask about your health? I frowned. Not very often. Grace nodded. That's interesting. I knew what she was implying, but I wasn't ready to accept it. Not yet. I still wanted to believe the best about people, especially family. Unfortunately, reality has a way of forcing itself into view. One evening, Lily called me unexpectedly. She sounded upset. Grandma? What's wrong, sweetheart? There was a pause. Then she spoke softly. I wasn't supposed to hear this. My heart immediately tightened. Hear what? I heard Mom and Dad talking. I sat down. What were they saying? Another pause. They were talking about your house. I felt cold. What exactly did they say? Lily hesitated. I don't know everything. That's okay. But Mum said it would solve a lot of problems. My pulse quickened. What would? The house. Silence filled the room. Then Lily added something that stayed with me. She sounded angry because you won't sell it. After we ended the call, I sat motionless for nearly an hour. The house would solve a lot of problems. What problems? What exactly was Vanessa planning? The next few days were difficult. Questions kept circling through my mind. Questions I didn't want to ask. Questions I was afraid to answer. Then another incident happened, and this one was impossible to ignore. I was balancing my checkbook when Ethan called. At first, the conversation seemed normal. Then he casually mentioned something strange. Vanessa says you should add me to your accounts. I nearly laughed. What? You know, just in case of emergencies. I was stunned. Ethan, I've managed my finances for decades. I know. Then why would I do that? He hesitated, and in that hesitation, I heard uncertainty, as though he wasn't entirely convinced either. But instead of dropping the subject, he pushed forward. It would make things easier. Easier. Another word I was beginning to hate. Everything was supposedly about making things easier. Easier for whom? Certainly not for me. When I ended the call, I walked into the living room and stared at William's photograph above the fireplace. The same photograph I had looked at countless times before. But now something felt different. I remembered his warning. Don't rush into decisions, especially decisions involving money, property, or family. At the time, those words had seemed overly cautious. Now they felt prophetic. That night, I pulled the sealed envelope from my bedside drawer, the envelope I had discovered among William's belongings, the envelope that still waited to be opened. I traced my fingers across his handwriting. Part of me was afraid of what I might learn, afraid that opening it would confirm everything I was beginning to suspect. Because if William had truly anticipated this, if he had seen danger before I did, then maybe the problem wasn't my imagination. Maybe the problem was much bigger than I realized. And somewhere deep inside, a terrible thought began forming. What if Vanessa wasn't trying to help me at all? What if she was simply waiting for the right moment to take everything William and I had spent a lifetime building? As rain tapped softly against the windows, I stared at the envelope for a long time. Then I placed it carefully on the table in front of me. Tomorrow, I promised myself. Tomorrow I would finally open it. And once I did, nothing in my family would ever be the same again. The next morning I woke before sunrise. For several minutes, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the quiet hum of the air conditioner. The envelope sat on my nightstand, waiting. William's handwriting seemed almost alive in the dim morning light. Open this if they make you feel small. I wanted to open it immediately, but something stopped me. Perhaps fear, perhaps denial, because once I read whatever was inside, I couldn't unread it. And part of me still hoped I was wrong about everything. Part of me still wanted to believe that my family was simply going through a difficult phase. That Ethan would wake up and remember who he was. That Vanessa would soften. That everything could somehow return to normal. But deep down, I already knew better. The breaking point came 3 days later. Sunday dinner. The dinner that changed everything. For years, our family had gathered every Sunday evening. It was a tradition William had started when Ethan was a teenager. No matter how busy life became, Sunday dinner belonged to family. Even after William died, I continued the tradition. I cooked, I hosted, I cleaned, because it made me feel connected to him. That evening, I spent nearly the entire afternoon preparing food. Pot roast, mashed potatoes, homemade rolls, apple pie. Some habits survive grief because they're tied to love. By 5 o'clock, everyone had arrived. Ethan carried drinks into the kitchen. Vanessa brought a salad. Lily immediately hugged me. Mason asked if we could watch football after dinner. For a brief moment, everything felt normal, almost happy. I should have known it wouldn't last. Dinner began peacefully. We talked about school, sports, the weather, local news. Nothing controversial, nothing emotional. Then Lily mentioned college. I've been looking at universities in Michigan and Pennsylvania. I smiled. That's wonderful, Lily beamed. I really want to study education. My heart warmed immediately. Like your grandmother, she laughed. Exactly. Without thinking, I offered some advice. If teaching is what you love, choose the school that feels right for you. Not necessarily the most expensive one. It was a simple comment. Gentle, supportive, the kind of advice grandparents have given for generations. But before Lily could respond, Vanessa put down her fork. The sound echoed across the table. Then she smiled. That smile. The one I had come to recognize. The smile that always appeared before something unpleasant. Well, she said, things are different now than when you were young. The room grew slightly quieter. I nodded politely. Of course they are. Vanessa took a sip of wine. College decisions today are more complicated. That's true. So maybe Lily should get advice from people who actually understand the modern world. The words landed like a slap. For a second, nobody spoke. I felt heat rise into my face. Still, I remained calm. I'm simply sharing my experience. Vanessa laughed softly. Exactly. Something in her tone made Lily look uncomfortable. Even Mason stopped eating. I noticed Ethan staring down at his plate, not saying a word, not intervening, not helping. The same silence that had become all too familiar. I could have let it go. Normally, I would have. But after months of being dismissed, ignored, and treated like a burden, something inside me felt fragile, and Vanessa seemed determined to test just how much I could endure. She leaned back in her chair. Then came the sentence that would change everything. Honestly, I think older people need to learn when to stay quiet and let younger people make the decisions. The room froze. Completely froze. I heard the ticking of the kitchen clock. I heard the distant barking of a dog somewhere outside. I even heard my own heartbeat. But nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Nobody defended me. Not even my son. My eyes slowly shifted toward Ethan. He knew. He knew exactly what had just happened. He knew his wife had insulted me in my own home, at my own table, after I had spent hours cooking for everyone. Yet he remained silent. That hurt more than Vanessa's words ever could. A stranger's cruelty is painful. A child's silence is devastating. Lily looked horrified. Mom? Vanessa waved her off. What? That wasn't nice. I'm just being honest. The casual cruelty in her voice stunned me, as though my feelings were irrelevant, as though respect was optional, as though age erased a person's worth. I swallowed hard. For a moment I thought I might cry, but I refused to give Vanessa that satisfaction. Instead, I stood up, quietly. I think I'm going to clear the table. The room remained awkwardly silent. No one stopped me, no one apologized, no one followed me. As I carried dishes into the kitchen, I could hear conversations slowly resume in the dining room. As though nothing had happened. As though I had not just been humiliated. I stood at the sink, staring out the window. My reflection looked older than I remembered, more tired, more alone. For the first time since William died, I felt truly abandoned, not by him, by the people still living. When dinner finally ended, everyone left quickly. Vanessa barely said goodbye. Ethan hugged me, but even that felt hollow. Love you, Mom. I forced a smile. Love you too. Then they were gone. The house fell silent. Once again. I locked the front door, turned off the lights, cleaned the last few dishes, and then I sat alone at the kitchen table. The same table where William and I had shared thousands of meals. The same table where Ethan had done homework. The same table where birthdays had been celebrated. Now it felt strangely empty. I sat there for nearly 20 minutes, not moving, not thinking, just feeling. The pain, the disappointment, the loneliness. Then my eyes drifted toward the hallway, toward the small desk where I kept important papers. Something pulled me there. Almost instinctively, I opened the drawer, and there it was. The envelope. William's envelope. The one I had carried around for days without opening. My hands trembled as I picked it up. The paper felt fragile beneath my fingers. I stared at his handwriting again. Open this if they make you feel small. A tear slid down my cheek, because for the first time, I truly understood why he had written those words. Tonight, they had made me feel small. Smaller than I had felt in years. Smaller than any person deserves to feel. Slowly, I broke the seal. The sound seemed impossibly loud in the quiet kitchen. My heart pounded. Inside was a folded letter, several pages long, written entirely in William's familiar handwriting. For a moment, I simply held it, breathing, remembering, missing him. Then I unfolded the first page and read the opening sentence. The moment my eyes reached those words, I felt the blood drain from my face, because William had written exactly what I needed to hear. And somehow, he had known this day would come. My hands were shaking so badly that I had to place the letter on the table before I could continue reading. For a moment, I simply stared at William's handwriting. It had been 4 years since I had seen him write anything, yet the sight of those familiar words instantly transported me back to the countless notes he used to leave around the house. Little messages tucked into lunch bags, birthday cards, anniversary letters, reminders stuck to the refrigerator. His handwriting had always made me feel safe, and somehow, even now, it still did. I took a deep breath and began reading. My dearest Charlotte, if you're reading this letter, then something has happened that I prayed never would. Tears immediately filled my eyes. I could almost hear his voice, slow, steady, comforting. I suspect that someone has made you feel unimportant, ignored, or powerless. I stopped reading. A chill ran through my body. How could he possibly know? I looked around the empty kitchen as though William might somehow be standing nearby. Then I forced myself to continue. If that has happened, I need you to remember something very important. You are not weak. You are not a burden. And you are certainly not a woman who should be silent. A sob escaped before I could stop it, because those were the exact words I needed, the exact words Vanessa had tried to take away from me. For months, maybe years, I had slowly begun questioning myself, questioning my judgment, questioning my value, questioning whether I still mattered. And now, from beyond the grave, my husband was reminding me who I was. I wiped my eyes and continued. Charlotte, during the final years of my life, I paid very close attention to the people around us, especially the people who would remain after I was gone. My breathing slowed. Every word suddenly felt significant. Every sentence felt intentional. There are things I noticed that I never fully discussed with you because I didn't want to cause unnecessary conflict while I was alive. My stomach tightened. This was no longer just a loving letter. This was becoming something else, something important. However, I promised myself that if circumstances ever required it, I would leave you the truth. The next paragraph changed everything. Please understand that not everyone who smiles at you wishes you well. Some people see kindness and mistake it for weakness. Some people see generosity and mistake it for opportunity. And some people see age and mistake it for vulnerability. I sat completely still. William wasn't naming anyone, but he didn't need to. I knew exactly who came to mind. Vanessa. For the first time, I allowed myself to admit it. The possibility that Grace had been right. The possibility that my instincts had been right. The possibility that I wasn't imagining any of it. I continued reading. If you have reached a point where someone is pressuring you regarding money, property, legal documents, or major life decisions, I need you to stop trusting appearances. Do not sign anything. Do not transfer anything. Do not allow guilt, fear, or family pressure to influence your judgment. I felt a wave of shock, because those were the exact subjects Vanessa constantly brought up. The house, the accounts, the future, the paperwork, the trust, the so-called help. Every conversation eventually returned to those topics. Every single one. I turned the page. William's writing became more direct. Charlotte, there is one person you must contact immediately if this letter ever becomes necessary. Below the sentence was a name. Benjamin Carter. I recognized it instantly. Benjamin had been William's attorney for nearly 30 years. More than that, he had been one of William's closest friends. We had attended their family barbecues, their children's weddings, holiday parties. Yet after William's death, I had barely spoken to him. Life had moved on, or at least I thought it had. I kept reading. Benjamin knows everything. He knows the plans we made. He knows what I've put in place. And he knows why I felt it was necessary. A strange mixture of confusion and curiosity washed over me. What plans? What exactly had William done? I had helped manage our finances for decades. I knew about our savings, the insurance policies, the retirement accounts, the house. At least I thought I did. Apparently there was more. Much more. Then I reached the paragraph that made my heart race. There are protections in place that I intentionally chose not to discuss while I was alive. Not because I didn't trust you. Because I wanted those protections to remain invisible unless they were truly needed. I stared at the words. Protections. What protections? Against whom? The questions flooded my mind. I turned another page. And there, near the bottom, William wrote something that nearly took my breath away. If someone is attempting to manipulate you, control your decisions, or gain access to your assets through pressure, Benjamin will know exactly what to do. Manipulate. Control. Pressure. Those weren't random words. They described my life over the past year with terrifying accuracy. I suddenly remembered every conversation, every suggestion, every subtle insult, every attempt to make me feel incapable. The pattern was becoming impossible to ignore. For the first time, anger began replacing sadness. Not rage, not bitterness, just clarity. The kind of clarity that arrives when denial finally disappears. I wasn't losing my mind. I wasn't becoming overly sensitive. Something was genuinely wrong. And William had seen the possibility years ago. I reached the final page. The last section felt different, more personal, more intimate. Charlotte, if you're reading this, then I need you to hear one final thing. You spent your entire life putting others before yourself. You were a wonderful wife, a devoted mother, and the strongest person I have ever known. Do not spend the years you have left apologizing for taking up space. Do not allow anyone to convince you that your voice no longer matters. And never allow anyone to make you feel small in a house that was built with your sacrifices. By the time I finished reading, tears were streaming down my face, but something had changed. The helplessness was gone. Not completely, but enough. For months, I had felt as though the ground beneath me was slowly disappearing. Now I felt something solid again. Direction, purpose, resolve. Then I noticed a handwritten note at the bottom of the final page. A note I had somehow missed. Call Benjamin before you do anything else. And Charlotte, trust your instincts. I folded the letter carefully. Then I sat quietly for several minutes, thinking, remembering, connecting pieces I had ignored for too long. Finally, I stood up, walked to the hallway desk, opened my address book, and found Benjamin Carter's number. It was nearly 10 o'clock at night. Too late to call, but not too late to make a decision. Tomorrow morning, I would contact him. Tomorrow morning, I would find out what William had hidden. Tomorrow morning, I would finally learn why my husband had been so certain that one day I might need protection. And for the first time in a very long while, I wasn't afraid of the answers. I was ready for them, even if they changed everything I thought I knew about my family. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, William's letter replayed in my mind. Benjamin knows everything. There are protections in place. Trust your instincts. For 4 years, I had believed William had left behind only memories. Now I was beginning to realize he may have left behind something far more powerful. A plan. A safeguard. A final act of protection. At exactly 9 o'clock the next morning, I called Benjamin Carter. He answered on the second ring. Benjamin Carter speaking. For a moment I couldn't talk. Hearing his voice brought back memories of backyard cookouts, fishing trips, and holiday gatherings with William. Benjamin, it's Charlotte. There was a brief silence, then warmth filled his voice. Charlotte. He sounded almost relieved, as if he had been expecting this call someday. I need to see you. Another pause. Did you open the letter? My heart skipped. You know about it? I know about all of them. All of them. The words immediately caught my attention, not the letter. Letters. Plural. William had left more than one. I think we should talk in person, Benjamin said gently. When can you come in? Today. Good. His voice grew serious. I have been waiting a long time for this conversation. Benjamin's office was located in downtown Columbus. The building looked exactly as I remembered. Brick exterior, polished brass doors, the same law firm William had used for decades. As I entered the reception area, Benjamin was already waiting. He looked older than I remembered. More grey hair, more wrinkles, but the same calm eyes, the same steady presence. The moment he saw me, he stood. Without saying a word, he wrapped me in a hug. For the first time since William's death, I felt as though someone truly understood what I was carrying. When we finally sat down in his office, Benjamin folded his hands on the desk. "So," he said quietly, "it finally happened." The statement sent a chill through me. "You really expected this?" Benjamin nodded slowly. "No." Then he corrected himself. "William expected it." I leaned forward. "What exactly did he expect?" Benjamin was silent for several moments, choosing his words carefully. Before he died, William became concerned. "About Vanessa?" Benjamin didn't answer immediately. That answer alone told me enough. Finally, he nodded. "Yes." A strange sadness washed over me, because hearing someone else confirm my fears made them real. No more excuses, no more denial, no more pretending. Benjamin opened a file drawer. Then he removed a thick folder. My name was printed across the front. Charlotte Higgins. I stared at it. "How long have you had that?" "Nearly 5 years." My stomach tightened. 5 years. That meant William had created it before his diagnosis became terminal. Before we even knew how little time remained. Benjamin opened the folder. Inside were legal documents, handwritten notes, and several sealed envelopes. My pulse quickened. William had been preparing for something. Something significant. Benjamin pulled out a document and placed it on the desk. "Charlotte, how much do you know about your trust?" I frowned. "Our trust?" "Yes." I shook my head. "I know we had estate planning." Benjamin smiled sadly. "That's what William wanted you to think." I stared at him. "What does that mean?" He leaned back. "It means William created something far more extensive." My heart began pounding. Benjamin slid the document toward me. Across the top were words I had never seen before. "There's the Higgins Family Protection Trust." "What is this?" Benjamin folded his hands. "This trust owns the majority of the family's major assets." "The house?" "Yes." I blinked. "The house isn't mine?" Benjamin smiled. "Oh, it benefits you completely. But technically the trust owns it." I felt completely confused. "Why?" Benjamin took a deep breath. "Because William wanted to protect it." The room suddenly felt smaller. "Protect it from what?" His eyes met mine. "From anyone who might try to take advantage of you." A chill ran through me. Benjamin continued. "When William established the trust, he insisted on several very unusual provisions." "What kind of provisions?" "The kind that made me ask if he was planning a spy operation instead of an estate plan." For the first time that day, I almost laughed. That sounded exactly like William. Practical, thorough, always 3 steps ahead. Benjamin opened another section of the file. "Charlotte, the trust contains anti-coercion clauses." I frowned. "Anti-what?" "Anti-coercion." He pointed to the document. "In simple terms, anyone who attempts to pressure, manipulate, deceive, or improperly influence you regarding major assets can lose inheritance rights." I stared at him, completely stunned. "You're serious?" "Very." My mouth went dry. "William did that?" Benjamin nodded. "He specifically requested it." 1,000 thoughts exploded in my head. Vanessa asking about the house. Vanessa pushing me to sell. Vanessa wanting access to accounts. Vanessa constantly questioning my decisions. Suddenly, those memories looked very different. Benjamin continued. "There's more." Of course there was. There always seemed to be more. He removed another document. "This clause is even stronger." I glanced down. The language was complicated, legal, formal, difficult to follow. Benjamin simplified it. "If someone tries to convince you that you're mentally incapable when you're not," my eyes widened, "that person can be completely excluded from the future distributions." I felt a knot form in my stomach. Because recently Vanessa had begun making comments that sounded disturbingly similar. Maybe you shouldn't drive alone. Maybe someone should handle your finances. Maybe you're forgetting things. Maybe it's time for assisted living. At the time, I thought she was being overprotective. Now I wasn't so sure. Benjamin studied my face carefully. What has been happening, Charlotte? For the next 20 minutes, I told him everything. Every conversation, every comment, every uncomfortable interaction. The dinner, the insults, the pressure, the questions about money, the suggestions about selling the house, the request to access my accounts, the fake concern, the constant attempts to make me feel incapable. Benjamin listened without interrupting. The more I spoke, the more serious he became. When I finally finished, he slowly removed his glasses. That's worse than I expected. The words landed heavily. Worse? Benjamin nodded. Much worse. My heart sank. You think she's trying to take control? Benjamin chose his answer carefully. I think William's concerns were justified. The room fell silent. I looked down at the documents, at the trust, at the protections, at the evidence that my husband had somehow seen danger years before I did. Then, Benjamin reached into the folder once more. He pulled out another sealed envelope. My breath caught. William's handwriting covered the front, but this time it wasn't addressed to me. It was addressed to Ethan. I stared at it, unable to look away. What is that? Benjamin placed it carefully on the desk. One of several letters William left behind. Several, not one. Several. My pulse accelerated. What does it say? Benjamin shook his head. I don't know. You never read it? No. He tapped the envelope. William was very specific. When should it be opened? Benjamin looked directly into my eyes. Only if the family reached the point he feared it might. A cold sensation spread through my chest, because suddenly I realized something. William hadn't merely created a trust. He hadn't simply left advice. He had built an entire system. A system designed to activate if certain lines were crossed. And judging by the expression on Benjamin's face, we were getting dangerously close to those lines. I drove home from Benjamin Carter's office with my mind spinning. The world outside my windshield looked exactly the same. The same roads, the same neighborhoods, the same familiar Ohio sky. But nothing felt the same anymore. For months I had been questioning myself. Now, for the first time, I was questioning other people. More specifically, I was questioning Vanessa. And that realization hurt more than I wanted to admit, because despite everything, she was still my son's wife, the mother of my grandchildren. Part of me desperately wanted Benjamin to be wrong. Part of me still hoped there was some innocent explanation. But another part of me, the part William had trusted, was finally waking up. When I arrived home, I carefully locked the folder Benjamin had given me inside my bedroom safe. Then I placed William's letter beside it. For the first time in a long while, I felt prepared. Not safe, not yet, but prepared. And apparently that timing mattered. Because less than a week later, Vanessa made her move. It happened on a Thursday afternoon. I was watering flowers in the backyard when Ethan's SUV pulled into the driveway. I wasn't expecting company. A few minutes later, Ethan and Vanessa walked through the side gate. Vanessa carried a leather folder tucked under her arm. Immediately, my stomach tightened. Something told me this wasn't a casual visit. We exchanged greetings, made small talk, discussed the weather. Then Vanessa got straight to the point. We actually wanted to talk to you about something. There it was. I smiled politely. Of course. We moved inside and sat at the kitchen table, the same table where William's letter had changed my life. Vanessa opened the leather folder. Several documents appeared, neatly organized, already prepared. She slid them toward me. I think this could really help everyone. I didn't touch them. What is it? A financial assistance arrangement. The phrase sounded professional, almost comforting, but Benjamin's warning immediately echoed in my mind. Do not sign anything. Do not rush. Do not trust appearances. I looked at the first page. Power of attorney. My pulse quickened. I kept my face neutral. What exactly does this do? Vanessa smiled, the same smile she always used when she believed she was being clever. It simply allows Ethan to help manage things if you ever need assistance. If, well, you know, she shrugged casually, as we get older, things can happen. I noticed Ethan staring at the table, not meeting my eyes. That alone told me plenty. He knew what the document was, and he knew why they had brought it. I looked directly at my son. "Did you read this?" He hesitated. "A little." "A little," Vanessa answered for him. "It's standard." No, it wasn't. Benjamin had already explained what a broad power of attorney could do. Control finances, control transactions, control decisions, control nearly everything. I knew that now, but they didn't know I knew. And suddenly, an idea formed. I remembered something Benjamin had suggested. Sometimes the best way to understand someone's intentions is to let them keep talking. So I decided not to confront them. Not yet. Instead, I played the role they expected, confused, uncertain, easily influenced. I lowered my eyes. "Oh." Vanessa immediately relaxed, like a salesperson sensing a potential customer. "It's really just a precaution." "A precaution." "Exactly." She pointed at various sections. "If you became sick, if you had an accident, if you couldn't manage things yourself." Every explanation centered on one theme: control. Control disguised as help. Control disguised as concern. I listened quietly. Then I asked a simple question. "Why now?" For a split second, Vanessa froze. Only a second. But I noticed. Then she recovered. "We're just planning ahead. Planning ahead." The same phrase again. The phrase she always used when discussing my assets, my property, my future, never my happiness, never my wishes, always my resources. I nodded slowly, pretending to think. Meanwhile, my phone sat silently in my pocket, recording every word, every explanation, every pressure tactic. Benjamin had recommended documenting everything, and I intended to follow that advice. Vanessa continued speaking for nearly 20 minutes. The longer she talked, the more revealing she became. She spoke about simplifying finances, reducing burdens, managing responsibilities, making things easier. But every solution somehow required transferring authority away from me. Eventually, she pushed the papers closer. "There's no rush," which of course meant there absolutely was. "But the sooner we take care of it, the better." I looked at Ethan. My son still hadn't spoken much. "Do you think I should sign this?" For the first time all afternoon, he looked uncomfortable. "I just think—" He paused, searching for the right words. "I think Vanessa is trying to help." The answer hurt. Not because it was cruel, because it was weak. He wasn't supporting me. He wasn't supporting Vanessa. He was hiding, choosing the easiest path, the path that required the least confrontation. And unfortunately, that path always seemed to favor Vanessa. I smiled sadly. "I'll think about it." Vanessa's smile instantly tightened. Not angry, not yet, but disappointed. She had expected more progress, I could see it. Still, she remained composed. "Of course." Then she added something that made my skin crawl. "We just want to make sure everything stays in the family." Everything. Not me. Not my well-being. Everything. An interesting choice of words. Very interesting. After they left, I immediately called Benjamin. He listened carefully as I described the meeting. Then he asked one question. "Did you sign anything?" "No." "Good." I could hear genuine relief in his voice. "What do you think?" Benjamin was quiet for several seconds. Then he said something that surprised me. "I think Vanessa is becoming impatient." The observation unsettled me. "Why?" "Because patient people don't bring legal documents to kitchen tables." I couldn't argue with that. He continued. "Charlotte, pressure often increases when someone thinks they're running out of time." Those words stayed with me long after the call ended. Running out of time. What exactly was Vanessa worried about? Why was she pushing harder? What was motivating her? And most importantly, how far was she willing to go? That evening, I sat alone in the living room looking through old photo albums. Pictures of Ethan as a child, family vacations, Christmas mornings, baseball games, school graduations. I kept searching for the moment everything changed. The moment my little boy became a man who sat silently while others hurt his mother. But there wasn't one moment, just hundreds of small ones, tiny compromises, tiny silences, tiny failures, until eventually those small things became something much bigger. As the sun disappeared beyond the trees outside, I found myself staring at another unopened envelope from William's collection. Not Ethan's letter. Another one. Still sealed. Still waiting. Still holding secrets. I wasn't ready to open it. Not yet. But I had a feeling the time was coming. Because the game had changed. Vanessa thought she was slowly cornering me. What she didn't know was that every conversation was now being documented. Every pressure tactic was being recorded. Every move was being noticed. And if Benjamin was right, Vanessa's impatience was about to become her biggest mistake. The following week, I met Benjamin again. This time, he asked me to bring every document Vanessa had ever given me. Every form, every brochure, every handwritten note, everything. By the time I arrived at his office, I had filled an entire folder. Looking at that stack of papers made me realize something unsettling. Vanessa had been working towards something for much longer than I originally thought. This wasn't a sudden idea. This wasn't concern. This was a campaign. A slow, deliberate campaign. Benjamin spread the documents across a conference table. For nearly an hour, he reviewed each one carefully, occasionally making notes, occasionally shaking his head, occasionally sighing. None of those reactions made me feel better. Finally, he sat back in his chair. "Charlotte, I need you to understand something." His expression was unusually serious. "What?" "Your husband was smarter than I realized." I almost smiled. That's not exactly shocking. For the first time that morning, Benjamin laughed. "No, it isn't." Then he became serious again. "William didn't just protect your money." "What do you mean?" "He protected your independence." The words caught my attention immediately. Benjamin opened the trust documents again. He turned to a specific section. "This is what I wanted to show you." I leaned forward. The legal language looked complicated. Fortunately, Benjamin translated. "Your home is protected under what amounts to an anti-exploitation provision." I frowned. "Meaning?" "It means nobody can legally pressure you into transferring ownership." My eyes widened. Nobody? Nobody? A strange wave of relief washed through me. For months, I had felt as though my home was somehow under attack. Now I learned William had anticipated that possibility years earlier. Benjamin continued, "If anyone attempts to manipulate, coerce, deceive, intimidate, or improperly influence you regarding the property," he tapped the document, "they can be disqualified from receiving benefits connected to the trust." I stared at him, trying to process what he had said. Disqualified? Yes. The word hung in the air. Disqualified, not reduced, not limited, removed. Suddenly, dozens of conversations replayed in my mind every time Vanessa pushed me to sell, every time she questioned my ability to manage the house, every time she suggested I move somewhere smaller, every time she implied I was becoming incapable. Benjamin watched my reaction carefully. Then he added something that nearly made me stop breathing. "Based on everything you've told me, she may already have crossed that line." The room became very quiet. I wasn't prepared for that answer. Not because I doubted him, because the implications were enormous. "You're saying—" "I'm saying her actions could eventually trigger the exclusion clauses." I looked down at the trust documents. William had truly thought of everything. Not out of paranoia. Out of protection. He had spent his final years making sure nobody could take advantage of me after he was gone. Even now, years later, he was still shielding me. And somehow that realization brought tears to my eyes. Benjamin gave me a moment. Then he reached for another folder. "There's something else." Of course there was. There always seemed to be something else. He opened a file labeled Property Structure. Inside were copies of deeds, trust documents, and ownership records. Benjamin pointed to one page. The house isn't structured the way Vanessa thinks it is. What do you mean? She assumes it's a simple inheritance asset. It isn't? No. He shook his head. Not even close. I frowned. Explain. Benjamin smiled slightly. The trust owns the property. I understand that part. What you may not understand is what that means. I waited. He continued. The house cannot be sold without specific conditions being met. That surprised me. Even by Ethan. Especially by Ethan. I stared at him. The confidence in his voice was unmistakable. Benjamin pointed to another section. William made sure nobody, not Ethan, not future heirs, not anyone, could force a sale while you remain mentally competent. I felt a knot loosen inside my chest. For the first time in over a year, I truly felt safe. Not emotionally, not yet, but legally. And that mattered, because Vanessa's favourite weapon had always been uncertainty, making me question myself, making me doubt my future, making me fear losing control. Now those fears suddenly seemed much smaller. Benjamin leaned back. Do you know what William told me when he signed these papers? I shook my head. Benjamin smiled sadly. He said, if Charlotte ever needs this protection, it means I've already failed her by leaving too soon. The words shattered me. I looked away, trying not to cry, because that sounded exactly like William. Always worrying about me, always protecting me, even while facing his own mortality. For a few moments, neither of us spoke. Then Benjamin cleared his throat. There's one more issue. My stomach tightened again. What now? It's Vanessa. Of course. Always Vanessa. Benjamin folded his hands. People who pursue control rarely stop when they encounter resistance. I frowned. What does that mean? It means she's unlikely to simply walk away. The truth of that settled heavily between us. Because deep down, I knew he was right. Vanessa wasn't the type to abandon a goal, especially not one she had spent years pursuing. Benjamin continued. In fact, I expect the pressure to increase. I didn't like the sound of that. How much? I don't know. But enough that you need to be prepared. Prepared. Another word William seemed to love. Prepared for problems. Prepared for people. Prepared for betrayal. Prepared for life. Benjamin handed me copies of several documents. Keep these. I accepted them carefully. What should I do next? His answer was immediate. Nothing. I blinked. Nothing. Let her keep talking. I smiled. That was exactly what he had said before. Why? Because impatient people reveal themselves. I couldn't argue with that. Vanessa already had. More than once. The only question was how much further she would go. 3 days later, I got my answer. It was Saturday morning. I was drinking coffee on the back porch when my phone rang. The caller ID displayed Vanessa's name. I considered letting it go to voicemail. Instead, I answered, Hello? Her voice sounded unusually cheerful. Charlotte, we were wondering if you'd like to come over tomorrow. The sweetness felt forced, artificial, dangerously artificial. Tomorrow? Yes, family lunch. I hesitated. Vanessa never called just to be nice. Never. There was always a reason, always an objective, always a destination she was trying to reach. What time? 1 o'clock. Then she added something that immediately raised every alarm bell in my body. There are a few things Ethan and I would like to discuss. There it was. The real purpose, the reason for the invitation, the agenda hidden behind the smile. I agreed to come, then ended the call. As I lowered the phone, a strange feeling settled over me. Not fear, not exactly, something closer to certainty. Benjamin had been right. The pressure wasn't stopping. It was escalating, and somewhere deep inside I sensed that tomorrow's lunch would not be an ordinary family gathering. It would be another move, another attempt, another step in whatever plan Vanessa had been building. The difference now was simple. She still believed I was vulnerable. She still believed I was alone. She still believed she understood the game. What she didn't know was that William had left behind rules she had never seen, and every time she pushed harder, she was moving closer to triggering consequences she didn't even know existed. I arrived at Ethan and Vanessa's house a few minutes before 1 o'clock. The moment I pulled into the driveway, I knew something was different. Too many cars. Too many people. This wasn't a simple family lunch. It was something else. Something planned. Something deliberate. My pulse quickened. As I walked toward the front door, I counted at least 6 vehicles. Inside, I could already hear voices. Conversation. Laughter. Movement. Vanessa opened the door before I even knocked. Her smile was bright. Too bright. "Charlotte, we're so glad you came." The performance had begun. I stepped inside. Immediately, I noticed several relatives gathered in the living room. Vanessa's sister, a cousin, 2 family friends, even Ethan's older co-worker whom I barely knew. The atmosphere felt strangely formal, as though everyone had been invited for a specific purpose. Lily noticed me first. She rushed over and hugged me. "I'm glad you're here, Grandma." Her voice carried an emotion I couldn't quite identify. Concern, maybe even worry. That alone told me plenty. Mason appeared next. His smile seemed forced. Children often see things adults miss, and they usually sense tension long before anyone admits it exists. I squeezed both their hands, then followed Vanessa into the dining room. The moment I entered, my stomach tightened. Documents sat neatly arranged in the center of the table. Not lunch. Documents. I almost laughed. Benjamin had been right again. This wasn't a family gathering. It was a meeting with an agenda, a meeting where I was the subject, and probably the target. Vanessa gestured toward a chair. "Please sit." I did, then waited. For several moments, nobody spoke. Finally, Ethan cleared his throat. "Mom?" The nervousness in his voice immediately caught my attention. "We wanted to talk." I folded my hands calmly. "About what?" Vanessa jumped in before Ethan could answer. "We've all been concerned." There it was. Concern. Always concern. Wrapped in kindness. Covered in smiles. Disguised as love. "What kind of concern?" I asked. Vanessa exchanged a glance with her sister. Then she leaned forward. "Your future." I nodded slowly. "My future." "Yes?" She smiled again. "We think it's time to start considering options." Options. Another carefully chosen word. Not pressure, not control. Options. The language was becoming predictable. I remained silent, letting her continue. She always revealed more when given enough room. Vanessa pointed toward the documents. "We've done some research." Of course they had. Research? Retirement communities. There it was. The first real move. I looked down at the brochures. Beautiful buildings. Smiling seniors. Swimming pools. Activities. Luxury assisted living facilities. The message couldn't have been clearer. They wanted me out. Not eventually. Now. Vanessa continued speaking enthusiastically. "You'd have friends." Activities. Medical support. Transportation. She made it sound like a vacation brochure. Meanwhile, I noticed Ethan avoiding eye contact. Again. Always avoiding. Always silent. Always hiding. Finally, I interrupted. "Why would I leave my home?" The room grew slightly quieter. Vanessa's smile flickered, just for a moment, then returned. "We're thinking long-term." Long-term. Another favorite phrase. I looked directly at her. "No." The smile vanished, not completely, but enough. "I'm happy where I am." Vanessa nodded. "Of course." Yet her voice sounded strained, as though my answer had disrupted her script. She glanced toward Ethan, a silent request for assistance. This time he reluctantly stepped forward. "Mum, nobody is forcing you." The statement was technically true, but only technically. Pressure doesn't require force. Manipulation doesn't require threats. Sometimes all it requires is persistence. I looked at my son. "Then why are we having this meeting?" His face fell, because he knew. Deep down, he knew. Before he could answer, Vanessa spoke again. We just think it's time to be realistic. There it was. The insult hidden beneath the concern. Realistic. Meaning old. Meaning incapable. Meaning inconvenient. I felt something inside me harden. Not anger. Clarity. Pure clarity. For months I had questioned myself. Now I was watching the entire strategy unfold in front of witnesses. And suddenly, I understood why Benjamin had encouraged patience. Because people eventually expose themselves. Vanessa certainly was. She continued, "What happens if you fall? What happens if you get sick? What happens if you can't manage things anymore?" Question after question, each one built upon the same assumption. That decline was inevitable. That independence was temporary. That someone else should eventually take control. I listened quietly, then asked a question. Who would manage my affairs? The room fell silent. For just a second. 1 second was enough. Vanessa answered. Well, Ethan could help. There it was. Finally. The destination behind the journey. The objective behind the concern. The control behind the compassion. I looked around the room. Several people appeared uncomfortable. Even Vanessa's sister seemed uneasy, because once spoken aloud, the true purpose became much harder to hide. I decided to let her continue, and continue. She did. For nearly 20 minutes, she talked about responsibility, she talked about planning, she talked about family, she talked about making difficult decisions. The entire time, I simply listened. Then came the moment everything changed. Vanessa reached for another folder, a thicker folder, a more serious folder. My heart immediately accelerated, because I knew what was coming. Legal paperwork. Sure enough, she slid several documents across the table. These would make everything much easier. I didn't touch them. Power of attorney, property management authorization, financial access permissions, almost identical to the documents she had brought weeks earlier. Only now she had an audience, witnesses, social pressure, a coordinated effort, exactly the type of situation William had warned me about. I looked at Ethan, then at Vanessa, then at everyone else sitting around the room. And suddenly, I realized something. This wasn't a family discussion. This was an intervention. An intervention designed to convince me I was no longer capable of directing my own life. The realization should have frightened me. Instead, it made me calm, because for the first time, I wasn't walking into the trap blindly. I knew exactly what was happening. And more importantly, Benjamin knew too. In fact, as I glanced at my watch, I noticed the time, 1:42 p.m., right on schedule. Because unlike everyone else in that room, I hadn't come alone. No one knew it yet. Not Ethan, not Vanessa, not a single person sitting at that table. But before leaving home that morning, I had made one phone call, and the person I called was already on his way. Benjamin Carter. The man who knew every detail of William's plan. The man who knew exactly what protections existed. The man carrying documents none of them had ever seen. As Vanessa continued explaining why I should surrender control of my life, a knock echoed through the house. 3 firm knocks. The room instantly fell silent. Vanessa frowned. "We aren't expecting anyone." I almost smiled, because I knew exactly who had just arrived. And something told me the next hour was about to become the most uncomfortable hour of Vanessa Higgins's life. The knock came again. 3 calm, deliberate taps. No urgency, no hesitation, just confidence. The kind of confidence that comes from knowing exactly why you're there. For a moment, nobody moved. Vanessa looked annoyed. Ethan looked confused. The others exchanged curious glances, then Vanessa stood. "I'll get it." As she walked toward the front door, I quietly folded my hands in my lap. For the first time in months, I wasn't anxious. I wasn't afraid. I wasn't wondering what would happen next, because I already knew. A few seconds later, I heard Vanessa's voice from the entryway. The warmth was gone. Completely gone. "What are you doing here?" I almost smiled. Then came Benjamin's calm reply. "Good afternoon." The room fell silent. Everyone recognized immediately that this wasn't a social visit. Something serious was happening. Vanessa reappeared first. Her face had changed. The confidence was gone. Benjamin followed behind her carrying a leather briefcase. When Ethan saw him, his eyes widened. "Benjamin?" Benjamin nodded politely. "Ethan." Then he looked at me. "Charlotte." The warmth in his voice felt like a shield. Vanessa folded her arms. "I don't understand why a lawyer is here." Benjamin's expression never changed. "I was invited." The room became very quiet, because everyone suddenly realized something. I hadn't come alone. I had anticipated this. Vanessa's control of the situation had just disappeared. She looked at me. "You invited him?" "Yes." The single word landed heavily. For months they had treated me as if I couldn't make decisions. Now I was making one. Publicly. Confidently. Without permission. Benjamin placed his briefcase on the table, then took a seat beside me, not across from me. Beside me. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone. He was there to represent my interests, not theirs. Vanessa forced a smile. "Well, I suppose that's fine." It wasn't fine, and everyone knew it. Benjamin glanced at the documents spread across the table. Then he calmly asked, "May I?" Vanessa hesitated. That hesitation told the entire story. Finally, she nodded. Benjamin began reviewing the paperwork, one page at a time. The room remained silent. No one interrupted. No one spoke. The tension became almost unbearable. Then Benjamin slowly placed the documents back down. His expression was unreadable. "Interesting." Vanessa immediately jumped in. "Everything is perfectly legal," Benjamin nodded. "I didn't say otherwise." Then he added, "Legality and appropriateness aren't always the same thing." The statement landed like a stone. Several people shifted uncomfortably, including Ethan. Benjamin turned toward me. "Charlotte, have you signed any of these?" "No." "Good." The relief in his voice was obvious. Vanessa immediately became defensive. "These are standard planning documents." Benjamin smiled politely. "Perhaps." Then he looked around the room. "Does everyone here understand what these documents would do?" Nobody answered, because most of them didn't. Benjamin opened the folder, then calmly explained. The power of attorney, the financial authority, the property access provisions, the control mechanisms, one by one. In simple language everyone could understand. As he spoke, expressions began changing around the table. Confusion, surprise, concern. Even Vanessa's sister looked uncomfortable, because what had been presented as harmless assistance suddenly looked very different. When Benjamin finished, silence filled the room. Then Vanessa laughed nervously. "You're making it sound worse than it is." Benjamin looked directly at her. "No." His voice remained calm. "I'm explaining what it actually is." That sentence struck harder than any accusation, because facts are difficult to argue with, especially when a lawyer is reading them aloud. Vanessa looked toward Ethan, searching for support, for rescue, for anything. Ethan remained silent, and for the first time I noticed something unusual. He looked troubled, truly troubled. Not defensive, not dismissive, troubled, as though he was hearing certain details for the first time. Benjamin closed the folder, then turned toward me. "Charlotte, would you like me to explain why William created the Higgins Family Protection Trust?" The room froze. Vanessa's eyes narrowed. "The what?" Benjamin didn't answer her. He looked only at me. I nodded. "Yes." Slowly, Benjamin removed several documents from his briefcase. Official documents, signed documents, recorded documents, legal documents. Then he placed them on the table. "The Higgins Family Protection Trust." The words echoed through the room. Vanessa looked genuinely shocked. Ethan looked confused. Neither of them had expected this. Benjamin continued, "William Higgins established this trust several years before his death." I watched Ethan carefully. His face slowly paled because his father had never discussed this with him. Benjamin continued, "The trust owns the primary family residence." The room instantly erupted. "What?" Ethan blurted out. Vanessa sat upright. "What do you mean it owns the house?" Benjamin calmly pointed toward the paperwork. The property is protected through the trust structure. Vanessa's face lost colour. I noticed immediately, because this wasn't information she wanted. This wasn't information she expected. This was an obstacle. A massive obstacle. Benjamin continued speaking. The trust also contains several protective provisions. Vanessa interrupted. What provisions? Benjamin looked directly at her for the first time all afternoon. His answer was devastatingly simple. Protections against coercion. The room fell silent again. Completely silent. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Even the air seemed heavier. Benjamin continued. If any beneficiary attempts to manipulate, pressure, deceive, or improperly influence Charlotte Higgins regarding trust assets. He paused, then finished the sentence. That beneficiary may lose inheritance rights. The words hit like an explosion. Vanessa stared at him, speechless. Ethan looked stunned. His sister-in-law gasped quietly. Someone at the far end of the table whispered, "Oh my God." Benjamin didn't stop. There are also provisions regarding attempts to undermine Charlotte's independence. Vanessa immediately spoke. That's ridiculous. Benjamin calmly opened another page, then read directly from the document. Word for word, legal language, precise language, William's language. The room listened, and as they listened, the truth became impossible to ignore. William had anticipated exactly this type of situation, years ago, long before any of us imagined it, long before his illness, long before his death. He had seen possibilities others missed, and he had prepared accordingly. Vanessa looked increasingly uncomfortable. The confidence she carried at the beginning of the meeting had completely disappeared. For months, she believed she understood the situation. For months, she believed Charlotte Higgins was vulnerable. For months, she believed she was the smartest person in the room. Now she was discovering something painful. William Higgins had been smarter, much smarter. Benjamin turned toward me. Charlotte. I nodded. He handed me William's first letter, the one that changed everything. The one I had carried with me every day since opening it. The room watched silently. Benjamin spoke softly. I think it's time. My hands trembled slightly as I unfolded the pages. I looked around the table, at Ethan, at Lily, at Mason, at Vanessa. Then I began reading. My dearest Charlotte. The room became utterly still, and with every word I spoke, I could feel William's presence filling that house. Not physically, but emotionally, powerfully. As though the man Vanessa thought was gone forever had just walked back into the room, and before the afternoon was over, his voice was going to change everything. The room was so quiet that I could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway. No one interrupted me. No one moved. No one even looked away. As I continued reading William's letter aloud, it felt as though his voice was speaking through mine. My dearest Charlotte, if you're reading this, then someone has made you feel smaller than you truly are. I paused. Emotion tightened my throat. Across the table, Lily's eyes were already filling with tears. Mason sat unusually still. Even Ethan looked shaken. I continued, please remember that your worth does not disappear with age. The world may change, your hair may turn grey, your body may slow down, but your value remains exactly the same. A tear slipped down my cheek. For years, William had always known exactly what I needed to hear. Apparently, even death hadn't changed that. When I finished reading the final page, nobody spoke. For several long moments, silence filled the room. Then Benjamin quietly cleared his throat. There is another letter. Every head turned toward him. Ethan looked confused. Another letter? Benjamin nodded. Then he reached into his briefcase. My heart immediately began pounding, because I knew what he was holding, the sealed envelope, the one addressed to Ethan, the one William had left years ago, the one Benjamin had guarded all this time. Ethan stared at it. What is that? Benjamin placed it carefully on the table. Your father's instructions were very clear. Nobody spoke. Benjamin continued. This letter was to remain sealed unless circumstances reached a point where he felt it needed to be read. The room grew even quieter. Vanessa looked uncomfortable, very uncomfortable, because deep down she knew exactly why this moment was happening. Benjamin slid the envelope toward Ethan. "I believe we've reached that point." Ethan stared at the envelope without touching it. For a moment he looked like a little boy again, nervous, uncertain, vulnerable. Finally, he picked it up. His hands trembled, just like mine had. Slowly he broke the seal. The sound seemed impossibly loud. Then he unfolded the pages. For several seconds he simply stared at them, reading silently. His expression changed almost immediately. Confusion, surprise, pain, regret. I had never seen so many emotions cross my son's face so quickly. Finally, Benjamin spoke. "Would you like to read it privately?" Ethan shook his head. "No." His voice cracked. "No." He swallowed hard, then looked around the room. "I think everyone should hear this." My heart tightened, because whatever William had written, it was hitting Ethan hard, very hard. Ethan began reading aloud. "My son." The first two words alone nearly broke him. He stopped, took a breath, then continued. "If you're reading this letter, then something has happened that deeply disappointed me." The room went completely still. "Not because I believe you're a bad man, but because I believe you're capable of being a much better one." Ethan's voice wavered. I watched tears begin forming in his eyes. The same eyes William had passed down to him. "Throughout your life, your mother stood beside you. She protected you when you were afraid. She encouraged you when you doubted yourself. She sacrificed for you when nobody else could." Ethan paused again. This time he couldn't continue for several moments because those words were true. Every single one. I remembered working extra shifts to help pay his college expenses. I remembered staying awake all night when he was sick as a child. I remembered helping him through heartbreaks, failures, losses, everything. A mother's love rarely keeps score, but apparently William had. Ethan continued reading. "A day may come when you are forced to choose between convenience and character, between comfort and courage, between silence and doing what is right." My chest tightened, because I already knew where this was going, and judging by Ethan's face, so did he. "If that day comes, remember this. A man who remains silent while someone disrespects his mother is participating in that disrespect." The words hit the room like thunder. Nobody moved, nobody breathed, nobody looked away. Because everyone knew exactly what William was talking about. Everyone, including Ethan. His voice broke completely. He lowered the pages. Tears were now openly running down his face. For a moment I thought he might stop reading altogether. Instead, he forced himself to continue. "I am not asking you to agree with your mother about everything. I am asking you to remember who she is. She is not a burden. She is not an obstacle. She is not a problem that needs solving." I saw Vanessa look away, just briefly, but I noticed. So did everyone else. Because for months, maybe years, that was exactly how she had treated me. Like a problem, like an inconvenience, like something standing in the way of her plans. Ethan kept reading. "Money comes and goes. Property comes and goes. But there will only ever be one mother." A sob escaped him. The room remained silent. Nobody rushed to comfort him. Nobody interrupted. This was something he needed to hear. Something he needed to face. Then he reached the final section, and everything changed. "If you are reading this because your mother feels pressured, controlled, manipulated, or silenced, then you have already failed her." The sentence hung in the air. Brutal, direct, unavoidable. Ethan lowered his head, his shoulders shook. I had never seen my son cry like that. Not at William's funeral, not at his wedding, not ever. Then came the final paragraph. "Failure does not have to be permanent. You can still choose differently. You can still become the man I raised. But you must decide. Because every day you remain silent is another day someone else pays the price. The room was utterly still. Ethan slowly lowered the letter, then buried his face in his hands. Nobody spoke. Nobody knew what to say, because there was nothing to say. William had already said it, perfectly. Finally, after what felt like forever, Ethan looked up. His eyes were red. His face was pale. And for the first time in years, I saw my son clearly, not Vanessa's husband, not the bank manager, not the man who avoided conflict. My son, the boy William and I had raised. He turned toward me. "Mom." The word came out barely above a whisper. Then he looked down again, ashamed, heartbroken, lost. "I'm sorry." The room froze, because nobody had expected that, least of all Vanessa. I glanced toward her. The colour had drained from her face. She wasn't angry, not yet. She was worried. And for good reason. Because the foundation she'd spent years building was beginning to crack. Slowly, but visibly. And as Ethan clutched his father's letter, struggling to hold himself together, I realised something important. William had been right. The choice had finally arrived, the choice between silence and courage. And for the first time in a very long time. Ethan looked ready to make it. For several seconds after Ethan apologised, nobody spoke. The silence felt heavy, not uncomfortable. Important, the kind of silence that follows a truth nobody can ignore. Ethan sat motionless, still holding William's letter. His eyes remained fixed on the pages, almost as if he were afraid to look at anyone. Especially me. Across the table, Vanessa looked trapped. Not cornered yet, but trapped. The carefully controlled meeting she had organised was falling apart, and she knew it. Unfortunately for her, things were about to get much worse. Benjamin Carter slowly opened his briefcase again. The sound alone drew everyone's attention. Vanessa immediately noticed. Her posture stiffened. What now? The irritation in her voice was obvious. Benjamin remained calm. Documentation. My stomach tightened, because I knew exactly what he meant. The evidence I had spent weeks collecting. Benjamin removed a folder, then another, then another. Vanessa's confidence visibly weakened. Finally, she couldn't stay quiet. "This is ridiculous." Benjamin looked directly at her. "Is it?" His voice remained polite, which somehow made it even more intimidating. He opened the first folder. "Charlotte informed me that there have been repeated discussions regarding her property." Nobody answered. Benjamin continued. "Repeated discussions regarding transferring authority." Still nobody spoke. "Repeated discussions regarding assisted living." Vanessa folded her arms. "We were trying to help." Benjamin nodded. "I understand that's your position." Position, not truth. Position. A subtle difference, but an important one. Benjamin pulled out several printed documents, then placed them on the table. "I'd like to ask a few questions." Vanessa immediately became defensive. "What kind of questions?" "The honest kind." Several relatives shifted uncomfortably. Everyone could feel what was coming. Benjamin picked up the first document. "Did you contact retirement communities regarding Charlotte Higgins?" Vanessa hesitated, only for a second, but everyone noticed. "Maybe." Benjamin smiled slightly, then handed a document across the table. The logo of a retirement facility appeared at the top. Beneath it was a consultation request. Signed, dated, documented, the name on the request. Vanessa Higgins. The room instantly became silent. Lily looked confused. "What is that?" Nobody answered immediately. Benjamin did. "This is a request for information regarding long-term placement options for your grandmother." Lily stared at her mother. "What?" Vanessa quickly jumped in. "It was just research." Benjamin nodded again. "Perhaps." Then he picked up another document. "And this?" Vanessa's face tightened. I recognized the expression. Panic. The beginning of panic. Benjamin slid another paper forward. This time it came from a real estate office. Property evaluation inquiry. Estimated market value request. The address listed was mine. My house. The house Vanessa claimed she merely wanted me to enjoy. The house she claimed she wasn't interested in. The room erupted with murmurs. Even Ethan looked shocked. "What is this?" Vanessa immediately answered. "I was exploring possibilities. Without telling Mom." Ethan's voice was sharper now. Much sharper. Vanessa looked at him, then looked away. That told everyone enough. Benjamin wasn't finished. Not even close. He opened another folder. Inside were records of calls, emails, consultations, appointments, each one connected to property discussions, retirement facilities, or financial planning involving me, none of which I had known about. The deeper Benjamin went, the more uncomfortable the room became. Eventually, Ethan interrupted. His voice sounded different now, harder, more direct. "Why didn't you tell me about this?" Vanessa froze. For the first time all afternoon, she seemed genuinely caught off guard. Because the question wasn't coming from Benjamin. It wasn't coming from me. It was coming from her husband, and she didn't have a good answer. I didn't think it mattered. The moment she said it, she realized the mistake. Ethan stared at her. "It involved my mother," Vanessa tried again. "I was looking at options." "For what?" No answer. Ethan repeated the question. "For what?" Still no answer. The room felt suffocating. Then Benjamin quietly opened the final folder. The folder that changed everything. When I saw it, even I felt nervous, because this was the folder Benjamin had never discussed in detail. The folder he'd simply called Motive. Vanessa immediately noticed the label. Her face lost colour. Benjamin placed a single document on the table, then another, then another. Bank statements, loan documents, credit records, financial disclosures. Ethan stared at them, confused. "What am I looking at?" Benjamin answered carefully. "Financial pressure." The room went silent again. Ethan picked up the first document, read it, then the second, then the third. His face slowly transformed. Confusion became disbelief. Disbelief became shock. Shock became anger. The final document slipped from his fingers. He looked directly at Vanessa. "What is this?" Vanessa swallowed hard. Nothing. No answer. Just silence. Ethan stood. Actually stood. The movement startled everyone, including me, because Ethan rarely raised his voice, rarely challenged anyone, rarely confronted problems directly. But today was different. "What is this?" he repeated. Benjamin answered before Vanessa could. "Personal debt." The words landed like a bomb. Several relatives gasped. Lily looked stunned. Mason stared at the table. Ethan looked like he'd been punched. "How much?" Benjamin named the figure. "Sir." The room exploded. I won't repeat the exact amount, but it was enough to explain everything. The pressure, the urgency, the obsession with my house, the endless conversations, the power of attorney, the retirement communities, all of it. Every piece suddenly fit together. Vanessa wasn't simply controlling, she was desperate, and desperate people often make dangerous decisions. Ethan looked devastated. "You never told me." Vanessa's voice finally cracked. "I was handling it. By trying to take control of Mum's assets." The accusation hung in the air. Raw, direct, painful. Vanessa immediately shook her head. "That's not fair." "No?" Ethan pointed at the documents. "Then explain it." For once, she couldn't, because there was no explanation that made sense anymore. Not after the evidence, not after the letters, not after the trust, not after months of pressure. The story had collapsed, completely. For several moments, nobody spoke. Then something unexpected happened. Lily stood up. The entire room turned toward her. Her eyes were full of tears. She looked directly at her mother, then asked the question nobody else had been brave enough to ask. "Mum?" Her voice trembled. "Were you trying to get Grandma out of her house?" The room froze. Vanessa stared at her daughter, unable to answer. Because children have a way of cutting through layers of excuses. They go straight to the truth. And in that moment, The truth was standing in the middle of the room for everyone to see. Vanessa didn't answer. She couldn't, and her silence said more than any explanation ever could. Nobody came to Vanessa's rescue, not Ethan, not her sister, not the relatives sitting around the table, not even the family friends who had arrived expecting a pleasant Sunday gathering. After Lily's question, the silence became unbearable, because everyone already knew the answer. The evidence had spoken. The documents had spoken. William's letters had spoken. And Vanessa's silence had spoken loudest of all. Lily stood frozen beside her chair, waiting, hoping, wanting her mother to say something that would make everything better, something that would explain away the past year, something that would prove her grandmother hadn't been targeted, something that would restore the image she had of her family. But no explanation came. Instead, Vanessa looked away. And that was answer enough. I watched Lily's face fall. The disappointment in her eyes broke my heart, not because of what Vanessa had done to me, because of what it was doing to her children. The damage was spreading, touching everyone, exactly as family wounds often do. Eventually, Ethan spoke. His voice sounded hollow. "When did this start?" Vanessa looked at him. "What?" "The debt." No answer. "When did it start?" Still nothing. Finally, she whispered, "A few years ago." Ethan closed his eyes. A few years ago. The same period during which she had become increasingly interested in my house, increasingly interested in my finances, increasingly interested in controlling my future. The timing was impossible to ignore. I expected Ethan to become angry. Instead, he looked devastated. Absolutely devastated. Because betrayal hurts differently when it comes from someone you love. The pain isn't sharp. It's deep. It settles into places words can't reach. He sat back down slowly, then looked toward me. For several seconds, he couldn't speak. When he finally did, his voice barely rose above a whisper. "Mom." I met his eyes. The same eyes I'd watched open for the first time in a hospital room 43 years earlier. Now they were filled with regret. The kind of regret that arrives too late. I should have listened. The words hit me harder than I expected, because they were honest, painfully honest. I should have seen what was happening. No one interrupted him. No one tried to comfort him. This was his burden to carry, his truth to face. I kept telling myself everyone was trying to help. His voice cracked. I told myself you were being sensitive. The shame in his expression was overwhelming. And every time you looked hurt, he stopped, swallowed, then continued. I convinced myself it wasn't that bad. Tears filled my eyes, not because I wanted him to suffer, because I finally believed he understood. For the first time in years, he truly understood. The loneliness, the humiliation, the feeling of becoming invisible, the pain of being dismissed in my own family. Ethan lowered his head. I failed you. The room remained silent. Then he added something that surprised everyone, including me. I failed Dad too. His voice broke completely. The weight of William's letter had finally reached him, not as criticism, as truth. And sometimes truth hurts more. For a moment, I simply watched my son. Part of me wanted to run to him, to tell him everything was okay, to make the pain disappear. That's what mothers do, even when their children are adults, even when they've been hurt. But another part of me knew something important. Healing requires honesty, and honesty requires accountability. So I let the silence remain, not as punishment, as space. Space for him to understand, space for him to grow, space for him to become the man William believed he could be. Finally, Ethan looked at me again. Can you ever forgive me? The question hung in the air. Every person in the room waited for my answer. I took a slow breath, then another. The truth was complicated. Because forgiveness and healing aren't the same thing. Forgiveness can happen in a moment. Healing takes much longer. I don't know. The honesty surprised even me. Ethan lowered his eyes, but I continued. Not because I don't love you. His head lifted slightly. Because trust doesn't come back all at once. A tear rolled down his cheek. I wasn't trying to hurt him. I was telling him the truth. The same truth I had spent years avoiding. You didn't just ignore my feelings, Ethan. My voice remained calm. You ignored them repeatedly. The room was silent. I continued. When Vanessa criticized me, you stayed silent. When I felt uncomfortable, you stayed silent. When I felt disrespected, you stayed silent. Each sentence landed heavily, not because I raised my voice, because I didn't. Sometimes quiet truth carries the most weight. I kept waiting for my son to stand beside me. Another tear slipped down Ethan's face, and every time you chose the easier path. Nobody moved. Nobody interrupted. For once, everyone was listening. Really listening. I glanced briefly toward Vanessa. She looked stunned. Not angry. Not defensive. Stunned. Perhaps because she was finally seeing the full cost of her actions. Not financial cost. Human cost. Family cost. The destruction left behind. I turned back to Ethan. I'm not saying this to punish you. My voice softened. I'm saying it because if we're ever going to rebuild anything, we have to be honest about what happened. Ethan nodded slowly. He understood. At least, I think he did. Then I surprised everyone, including myself. I stood up, walked around the table, and placed my hand on his shoulder. Not because everything was fixed. It wasn't. Not even close. But because despite everything, he was still my son, and I could see that something had changed. Genuinely changed. The denial was gone. The excuses were gone. The blindness was gone. For the first time in years, he was seeing clearly, and clarity is often the first step toward redemption. Ethan covered my hand with his, then quietly whispered, I'm going to make this right. I wanted to believe him. Part of me did, but another part remained cautious. Because promises are easy. Change is hard. Very hard. Especially after years of mistakes. Still. For the first time in a very long time, hope appeared. Small, fragile, but real. Unfortunately, that hope came with a difficult realization, because while Ethan was finally beginning to change, I was beginning to realize something about myself, something I had avoided acknowledging, something William had tried to teach me through every letter. I couldn't heal while staying trapped in the place where all the pain happened. And as I looked around the room surrounded by broken trust, uncomfortable truths, and shattered illusions, a decision quietly formed in my heart, a decision nobody saw coming. Not Ethan, not Benjamin, not Vanessa, not even me. Because for the first time in decades, I wasn't thinking about what everyone else wanted. I was thinking about what I wanted. And that decision was about to change the next chapter of my life completely. For the next 2 weeks, I barely spoke to anyone. Not because I was angry, not because I wanted revenge, and certainly not because I was trying to punish Ethan. I simply needed space. For years, my life had revolved around other people's needs. William's illness, Ethan's struggles, my grandchildren, family obligations, family expectations, family problems. Somewhere along the way, I had forgotten something important. I was allowed to have a life too. Not just responsibilities, a life. One quiet morning, I sat on the back porch with a cup of coffee and looked across the yard. The sun was rising. Birds were singing. Everything looked exactly as it always had. Yet something felt different, lighter. For the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for the next uncomfortable conversation. I wasn't worrying about the next document Vanessa might bring. I wasn't wondering who was discussing my future behind my back. I was simply sitting, breathing, existing, and it felt wonderful. That morning I called Grace. I think I'm ready. There was a pause. Ready for what? I smiled. A new chapter. Grace laughed. I've been waiting years to hear those words. A few days later, she drove me 2 hours north to visit a small lakeside community she'd been talking about for months. It wasn't a retirement community. It wasn't assisted living. It wasn't anything like the places Vanessa had shown me. This was different. Small cottages, walking paths, a public library, coffee shops, gardens, people living life, not waiting for it to end. As we walked beside the lake, something inside me settled. Peace. Real peace. Not the kind that comes from avoiding conflict, the kind that comes from finally choosing yourself. For the first time since William died, I could imagine a future that wasn't centered around grief, or family drama, or survival. A future that belonged to me. And that realization changed everything. The following weekend, Ethan came to see me. Alone. No Vanessa. No pressure. No excuses. Just Ethan. When he arrived, he looked exhausted. The past few weeks had clearly taken a toll. We sat in the kitchen, the same kitchen where William's first letter had changed my life. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. Then Ethan finally broke the silence. "Mum." I looked up. "I'm sorry." Again. Not the quick apology people give to end an argument. A real apology. The kind that comes from understanding. The kind that hurts. "I know." His eyes filled with emotion. "I keep replaying everything." He shook his head. "The dinners. The comments. The way Vanessa talked to you. The way I said nothing." I listened quietly, because sometimes people need to hear themselves tell the truth. I thought avoiding conflict was keeping the peace. He laughed bitterly. "It wasn't. No. It was cowardice." The word surprised me, because it was exactly the word William would have used. Ethan looked away. "I don't know how I became that person." I reached across the table, touched his hand. "You became human." He looked confused. I smiled sadly. People make mistakes. His eyes filled with tears again. But not like this. I thought about that for a moment, then shook my head. Especially like this. Because the truth is simple. Most betrayals aren't committed by strangers. They're committed by ordinary people making small compromises. Small compromises become habits. Habits become patterns. Patterns become character. And before you realize it, you've become someone you never intended to be. Ethan nodded slowly. He understood. Then I told him something he wasn't expecting. "I'm moving." His head jerked up. "What?" "I'm moving." The color drained from his face. "Because of me?" "No." "Because of Vanessa?" "No." He looked confused. "Then why?" I smiled. Because for the first time the answer wasn't painful. It's time. The words surprised even me, but they were true. It was time. Not to run away, not to escape, to begin again. I told him about the lakeside cottage, the walking paths, the gardens, the library, the community, the future. By the time I finished, Ethan looked emotional, but he also smiled. A real smile. The first one I'd seen in a long time. Dad would have loved that place. I laughed softly. Yes, he would. Then Ethan said something that nearly broke my heart. "You're finally choosing yourself." The room fell silent, because he was right. After all these years, I finally was. 3 weeks later, I moved into my new cottage. It wasn't large, it wasn't fancy, but it was beautiful. The lake shimmered outside my bedroom window. Wildflowers grew near the walking trail. Neighbors waved when they passed. Nobody treated me like a burden. Nobody treated me like a problem. Nobody treated me like I was disappearing. I was simply Charlotte Higgins. And that felt wonderful. I joined a book club, started volunteering at the local library, made new friends, began laughing again. Really laughing. The kind of laughter that comes from happiness instead of politeness. For the first time in years, I felt alive, truly alive. Then, just when I thought the drama was finally over, Vanessa called. The first call since the family meeting. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity won. "Hello?" Her voice sounded different, less confident, less certain. "Charlotte?" I waited. For several seconds she said nothing. Then finally, "I want to meet." My stomach tightened, not from fear, from certainty. I already knew why she was calling, because people like Vanessa rarely walk away quietly, not when they believe something is still available. something still worth pursuing. I don't think that's a good idea. Her voice became sharper. We need to discuss some things. There it was. The same old tone, the same old agenda. Only weaker now. Much weaker. I looked out at the lake. The water reflected the afternoon sunlight. Peaceful, beautiful, free. Then I smiled. No. Silence. What? No. The word felt surprisingly powerful, because for most of my life I had avoided disappointing people, avoided confrontation, avoided conflict. Not anymore. I'm not discussing assets. I'm not discussing property. I'm not discussing inheritance. Another silence. Then Vanessa spoke. And in that moment I realized something. She still didn't understand. Not really. She still believed this story was about money. She still believed this story was about a house. She still believed this story was about ownership. But she was wrong. Very wrong. Because the real battle had never been about property. It had been about dignity. And thanks to William, I had finally reclaimed mine. For a long moment after I told Vanessa no, neither of us spoke. The silence stretched between us. Years ago, that silence would have made me uncomfortable. Years ago, I would have rushed to fill it, to explain myself, to soften my answer, to make sure nobody felt offended. Not anymore. Finally, Vanessa spoke. You owe me a conversation. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was familiar. The entitlement, the assumption. The belief that she was still entitled to my time, my energy, and my attention. I looked out at the lake again. The water moved gently beneath the afternoon sun, peaceful, unbothered, free. No, Vanessa. Her voice sharpened. Charlotte? No. The second time felt even easier. I don't owe anyone access to my life. The silence that followed was different. This time, it wasn't uncomfortable. It was final. Eventually she hung up, and just like that, it was over. Not the legal issues, not the family healing, but the power she thought she had over me. That was over, forever. The next several months passed quietly, wonderfully quietly. Benjamin handled the remaining trust matters. The legal protections William had created worked exactly as intended. Everything remained secure. Everything remained protected. Exactly as my husband had planned. Meanwhile, Ethan began doing something I hadn't expected. He stopped making promises and started making changes, real changes, the difficult kind, the kind that require consistency, the kind that take time. Every Saturday morning he drove to the lake. Sometimes we had breakfast, sometimes we walked along the water, sometimes we simply sat together and talked. No excuses. No defensiveness, no attempts to rewrite the past, just honesty. Slowly, our relationship began healing, not because either of us pretended nothing had happened, because we stopped pretending it hadn't. That's the difference. Real healing doesn't erase the wound, it acknowledges it, then builds something stronger around it. One afternoon, while we were fishing from a small dock near my cottage, Ethan finally asked the question he'd been carrying for months. Do you think Dad knew all of this would happen? I smiled softly. The question had crossed my own mind many times. No? He looked surprised. No? I shook my head. I don't think William knew exactly what would happen. Then why did he prepare for it? I looked across the water, thinking about the man I'd loved for 42 years. Because he understood people. Ethan nodded slowly. He always did. Yes, I smiled. He always did. William hadn't predicted the future. He had simply understood human nature. He understood greed, fear, manipulation, weakness, and love. Most importantly, he understood love because every document, every trust provision, every letter, every safeguard had been created for one reason: love, not control, not money. Love, the kind of love that protects even after death. Lily and Mason visited often too. Those visits became some of the happiest moments of my new life. One afternoon, Lily sat beside me on the porch swing. She was preparing college applications, the same topic that had sparked so much conflict months earlier. "Grandma?" "Yes," she smiled. I got accepted. My eyes immediately filled with tears. "You did?" She nodded excitedly. "The University of Michigan." I hugged her tightly. So tightly she laughed. Then she said something I will never forget. I chose it because it felt right. The exact advice I had tried to give her that night at dinner. The advice that had been dismissed, ignored, mocked. And yet here she was, following it. Because wisdom doesn't lose value with age. Sometimes it simply waits for the right person to hear it. Vanessa became a much smaller presence in our lives, not because anyone forced her away, because her choices created consequences. Trust, once broken, is difficult to rebuild, especially when it breaks in so many places at once. I didn't hate her. Surprisingly, I never did. Hatred is exhausting, and I was finally learning how to spend my energy on better things. Peace, family, friendship, purpose, healing. Those things mattered more, much more. Almost a year after the family meeting, Benjamin called. "There's one final item." My heart immediately knew what he meant. The last letter. William's final letter. The only one I hadn't opened. The one Benjamin had kept sealed all this time. A week later, I sat alone on my cottage porch. The lake shimmered in front of me, the evening sun painted everything gold, and in my hands rested the final envelope. My hands trembled as I opened it, not from fear, from love. Inside was a single page, only one. I unfolded it carefully, then began reading. "My beautiful Charlotte." Immediately, tears filled my eyes. Even after all this time, seeing those words affected me. I continued. "If you are reading this final letter, then it means you survived." A soft laugh escaped me through my tears. That sounded exactly like William. Gentle, warm, wise. "I imagine you've learned some difficult truths. I imagine some people disappointed you. And I imagine others surprised you." I smiled. He was right. About all of it. Then I reached the final message. The message William had apparently saved for last. The message that mattered most. "Charlotte, there is one lesson I hope you never forget. Never shrink yourself to make other people comfortable." My breath caught. I read the sentence again, slowly, carefully. "Never shrink yourself to make other people comfortable." The words hit harder than anything else he had written. Because that was exactly what I had done for years. I had made myself smaller, quieter, less demanding, less visible, less present. All to avoid conflict. All to keep peace. All to make other people comfortable. And in the process, I had forgotten my own worth. William's final letter wasn't about money. It wasn't about property. It wasn't about inheritance. It was about dignity, self-respect, identity, the things that matter most. I wiped away tears and looked out across the lake. The evening breeze moved gently through the trees, and for the first time in many years I felt completely at peace. Not because life was perfect. Not because everyone had changed. Not because every wound had healed. But because I finally remembered who I was. Charlotte Higgins. A wife, a mother, a grandmother, a teacher, a survivor. A woman whose voice still mattered, and no one would ever convince me otherwise again. A few weeks later, our family gathered for Sunday dinner. A new tradition, a new location, at my cottage beside the lake. Ethan helped set the table. Lily talked excitedly about college. Mason teased everyone as usual. The atmosphere felt different, lighter, healthier, more honest. At one point, Ethan asked for my opinion about something, and everyone waited for my answer. Not because they had to, because they wanted to hear it. I glanced briefly toward the empty chair beside me. The chair nobody occupied. William's chair. And somehow, I smiled, because I knew, without a doubt, he would have been smiling too. When I look back on everything that happened, I realize this story was never truly about a house, money, or inheritance. It was about something far more valuable. It was about dignity. So many people spend their lives caring for others that they slowly forget to care for themselves. They become the peacemakers, the sacrificers, the ones who stay quiet to avoid conflict. Little by little, they begin shrinking themselves so everyone else can feel comfortable. I know, because I did exactly that. For years, I convinced myself that staying silent was the same as being kind. I believed that avoiding confrontation would protect my family. I thought that if I just tolerated a little more disrespect, a little more dismissal, a little more pain, things would eventually get better. But silence has a price. Every time we allow someone to treat us as if we don't matter, we teach them that our voice can be ignored. Every time we accept disrespect in exchange for temporary peace, we lose a small piece of ourselves. The greatest lesson I learned is this: growing older does not make you less important. Your age does not erase your wisdom. Your grey hair does not diminish your value. Your slower steps do not make your opinions irrelevant. You are not a burden because you need help sometimes. You are not invisible because younger people enter the room. And you should never apologize for taking up space in a life you spent decades building. The people who truly love you will not ask you to become smaller. They will encourage you to stand taller. They will listen when you speak. They will honor your experience. They will treat you with the same respect they hope to receive one day themselves. And if someone cannot do that, the problem is not your age. The problem is their character. So wherever you are today, I hope you remember this. Never allow anyone to convince you that your voice no longer matters. Because it does. It always will. And sometimes the most powerful thing a person can do is simply refuse to become smaller than they truly are. If this story touched your heart, I'd love to hear from you in the comments. Have you ever experienced a situation where someone underestimated you, dismissed you, or made you feel invisible? What lesson did life teach you through that experience? Tell me where you're watching from and what time it is there right now. I always enjoy reading your messages and hearing your stories. And if you enjoy heartfelt stories about family, resilience, justice, and second chances, please like this video and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss future stories. Your support helps this community continue to grow, and your comments often inspire others who may be facing similar struggles. Thank you for spending this time with me. Until next time, take care of yourself and never forget your worth.